music today.
Want to go over a few housekeeping rules. This session is going to promptly begin at 12 o'clock. Just want to remind you, if you have any questions or comments, we do have the chat feature. It's available for questions and comments. Any comments that you need that's directed at the panelists, please message them directly. Anything that you want to be made public, put it in the chat so that the large group can see it. And just a reminder that this session is being recorded. So on our agenda for today, we have our guest speaker, Dr. Celia McIntosh. Dr. Kimbrough will be introducing her. Our focus for today's interview is today's consequences of women's equality. And we'll have Matt Burrow and Jesus Posh, who will be letting you know what's happening as it pertains to DEI. So next, without further ado, Dr. Kimbrough, if you can go ahead and introduce Dr. McIntosh. She's on mute.
Oh my gosh, I was muted. But good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us again this month to talk about some DE&I related topics. I'm very excited today to bring to you Dr. Celia McIntosh. She is very, very passionate about the work that she does around advocacy for policy change and for policy and social change. She is also a nurse practitioner. She has over 17 years of experience in the healthcare sector. She is also a doctor of nursing practice, and she also has her MS in family nursing. She currently works for Rochester Regional with the Neuroscience Center as a neurology nurse practitioner. She's also the current president of the Rochester Regional Coalition Against Human Trafficking. She is also the immediate past vice chair for the Police Accountability Board. She is the founding member of the Rochester Black Nurses Association. And she also organized the Yes Here campaign that included graphics, posters on bus shelters, digital monitors, and transit centers that highlighted human trafficking and the dangers associated with that. So thank you so much, Dr. McIntosh, for being here with us today. You really have an extensive resume. What you've done and what you do in the community is really, really important. And bringing light to this, I think when we think about some of the things that you are working on with the human trafficking and things like that, those are things that are always at the forefront of our mind. However, they play a role in the things that we do each and every day. So I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself or provide any additional information before we go into our questions. But I want to, number one, thank you for being with us today, but also thank you for the work that you are doing in our community.
Thank you, Dr. D, for that awesome introduction. And I want to thank everybody for having me here today. And just, I think, what's important for me to highlight here is that, my role in, the work that I do in the community really started in 2014. I actually found out about human trafficking for the first time then. And when I was being told about this, I couldn't believe that someone would trick you and force someone to have sex or to sell sex. So from that point on, I really, said I had to do something about it, to learn more. And I had been to 3 different schools of nursing and had never heard about this topic. So I felt like it was my mission to educate others, specifically healthcare providers, about the issue. And that's just really let me down this path of other advocacy, because what I found out was that human trafficking doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a lot of social issues. There's homelessness, mental health. There's child sexual abuse, which is the #1 predictor of human trafficking. So there's all these other issues that exist that also need some advocacy behind it for me to be a better advocate for the work I do in human trafficking. So thank you for having me today.
Yes, absolutely. So guys, as you know, this month is Women's Equality Day. And the reason that we focus on this, because there was a point in time in our history, not too long ago, where women did not have the equal rights as men, right? And there's implications in society on that. Although we were able to gain our rights through women's suffrage, there are still things today that impact us as consequences of us being unequal in our society. And some of those things I want to talk to Dr. McIntosh about in regards to what are those consequences, or how do those consequences come up that you have seen in your work?
Okay, so some of the ways that I see women inequality play out, specifically in the workplace, I would say when you think about acts of violence, when you think about sexual harassment, that plays out. When you think about sexism, a lot of times I'm seeing a lot of mansplaining. There's issues around misogyny and just how women are treated different in the workplace, how they're talked to, how they're talked down to. When we talk about unequal pay, I mean, Black women only get paid about 64 cents on every dollar compared to a white man, and has to work 214 days extra every year. Essentially, to make the same amount. So a lot of those things play into it. Another thing is that one of the biggest things I feel, women are not empowered to really amplify their worth. Like, they're not empowered to negotiate, salaries and position changes, and, work from home time, things with childcare. So all of those things play a role. Pregnancy is looked at essentially as like a problem, like a disease. And oftentimes, women do get paid differently because of that. Well, it's thought that they're going to need to be out more days. So many of those things are playing out. Some other consequences I would see outside of the workplace, though, would be that women are more vulnerable to, like I said, many different acts of violence, intimate partner violence, which can cause health, physical problems, mental health problems, which will eventually affect you in your workplace. If you're having, violence in the home, having bruises, you're not going to want to come to work, having emotional, abuse, all these things, economical abuse, because you can't get to work because you have dependency on your significant other, then all of those things are going to affect how you show up to work.
Okay. All right, very good. Thanks so much for sharing those, Dr. McIntosh. I want to touch on a few things that you talked about. You talked about mansplaining, and I've heard that term before, and I wonder if our audience has also heard that term. But can you give us some examples of what that is and what that can look like every day? And I think we've all experienced it, but we kind of maybe turn a blind eye, or, think that it's normal. We have normalized it. But what is mansplaining?
So how I've experienced it, essentially when, like, say, for example, I'm having a conversation with my male colleague, and maybe he thinks I'm not articulating what I'm saying appropriately enough to his level, he will cut me off and start explaining things. And I have also seen this happen in a meeting and called it directly out when one of the physician assistants was trying to explain her point. And the senior PA, male PA, jumped in and basically said, I think what she's trying to say is, and I said to him, I said, excuse me, are you mansplaining right now? And he immediately was taken back and stopped, because he realized, there's probably about 2 men on the call, and the majority of the other providers are women. So, immediately he had to stop and think, she's capable of saying what she needs. You should create that space. Everybody's voice has value and she should be heard. But that's how I've experienced it. Mm-hmm. Cutting you off, talking over you, explaining what you have to say, or just, maybe even taking what you're saying as their own. So That's how I've experienced it.
Absolutely. And I think what is so important about the story you just shared is that in the moment you called it out, right? And sometimes people usually say, after the meeting, they may come up to you and say that was wrong, or the other person, maybe you shouldn't have handled it that way. But I think what is so important is that in the moment, we can kind of call these things out so everybody recognizes them and everybody recognizes that it is an issue, but it takes a particular level of courage to do that, because sometimes you don't feel empowered enough to stand up and say, this is not okay, this is what is happening, or this is how you are coming off. Even the person that is mansplaining, he may not realize what he's doing, right? So if we don't take the opportunity to let him know that, then he will continue to do it. Like you said, he paused and he thought about it. And I think there's also some psychological implications there as well, when people are consistently, interrupted, not given a voice, not having the opportunity to have a voice. And Doctor, what would you say, or what have you seen, or in your research, is some of the psychological impact of these things?
Well, just similar to what you said, I mean, there may be honestly, some anxiety. You go to speak up, your voice starts trembling, you can't get your words out because you're worried. How am I going to be perceived? Is someone going to cut me off? Do they really want to hear what I have to say? Another piece is maybe imposter syndrome. Maybe I'm not capable of being here. Maybe I'm not, good enough to be in this role or good enough to be at this table. You start internalizing some of that, but it's really not, it's not you. But the society and those things, because you can't control anything in that moment, like you said, you really feel empowered. So those are some of the things. Depression, maybe a little PTSD. People don't really understand how traumatic some of those things can be, especially when you're in a group of, in your group of your peers and you get cut off. It just makes you feel like, wow, they don't value me here. And like I said, that it's a little cut every time that happens, and it feels like a little bit of a trauma. So I would say some of those things, not feeling empowered to speak up, also, down the future is going to affect your, ability to go for that next promotion.
Absolutely.
So it may even keep you stuck, isolated, especially if no one spoke up for you in the moment to say, that's not okay. She's capable of doing that, and maybe she'll also be able to advocate better in the workplace for a fellow colleague if, they are able to, advocate for her. But I would say many of those things will play into it. And then, like I said, if that's consistently happening, it creates a toxic environment, and ultimately people may want to leave long term, and which affects the company's bottom line.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing that you said, speak up for somebody else in the moment, because when you are experiencing these things, it is hard to process, but it is easier when someone else is on the outside and seeing this being played out. So I think that is so important. And we call that allyship, right? How to be an ally. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later, but being able to speak up and speak out when these things happen, but also being able to pull people in and have those teachable moments, just like Dr. McIntosh said, well, this is how you're coming off and this is how it's impacting others. A lot of times people say, that wasn't my intention, but we should be more concerned about the impact that it is having and those long-term impacts, that trauma, that, they don't want to stay in the workplace and, those different things. So I think that it is good that we bring awareness to this so that we can start creating that culture here in our workspace where we can speak up, speak out, and we feel safe doing that. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. Another thing that you mentioned was pay equity. So you said that it takes Black women 8 months, but also all women, for the most part, in general, are paid less than white men. So you have Asian women that are paid, and I don't have the pay scale up with me to kind of tell you or talk to those things, but I know it's Asian women, white women, Black women, then Latino women, and then Native American women, kind of in that order in which it takes us to work additional months, almost 8, 9, 10, even another year, just to get the same amount of pay when everything else is equal, right? Education, experience, and so forth and so on. So that says a lot about how society values women based on our history of inequality in our society. All right,
But
so
can I add something to that? I want to add something to this because as I was looking, for some stuff, information related to this, one of the things that kept cropping up, victim blaming. And when I was looking at victim blaming, there was a lot of information related to the role that's often coming from women. So when you're talking about, this inequality, we also have to address it from women too, because, there's a lot of that going on within our own genderhood, I guess.
yes.
So which perpetuates also the cycle. So I think that's important to note that women also play a role in keeping other women down and not elevating them, through these things.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I can agree 100% with that. And I think that we feel as though if I am a woman, then I cannot have biases, or I cannot hold these thoughts of inequality, inequity against women because I am a woman. And that's not true, right? Because it is so deep seated in us, it's normal for this to be a woman's thing, or for women to behave this way, or so it becomes normal for us. And then we start to, like you said, perpetuate that because it is normal, it is automatic to who we are and how we communicate, just because it has been normalized. So it takes an extra step for us to step outside of that and become educated and aware of these things. Thank you so much for your questions. We will, for Dr. McIntosh, we'll make sure that we answer those right after our talk. So the next question, and your response kind of leads me into that. What are some of the things that are happening in society today that perpetuates the inequality of women?
Well, a couple of things I would say, like I said, the victim blaming is a big one. That, I think everyone knows by now that Governor Cuomo has stepped down, and, just the complaints of sexual harassment, the fact that there's no accountability, that is a big thing that perpetuates it. We've seen with the work that I do, when you think about Jeffrey Epstein, that basically got off scot-free, no accountability. So victims are left to, they tell their story, nothing happens. So, and then of course the abuse from the victim blaming, that perpetuates, things too. But the fact that there's no accountability perpetuates this cycle. There's the whole social norms about, continuing violence against women. Really no regard. Like I said recently, when we think a lot about legislation is one of the big things, how the government puts restrictions on women. Like, let's think about reproductive justice. There's, why do we have Roe versus Wade? Women are not, it's kind of like, yeah, it's my body, my choice, but they are not, there are all these restrictions put on women, talking about things like abortion, not to get political, but those are some of the things that the government, legislation impacts women and how they are able to make decisions. But those same things, those same standards don't go for men.
Absolutely.
There's no cap on how there's no regulation on a man's body in terms of that. I was just reading some article recently about China. They used to have a 2-child rule, and now with the population kind of shrinking, they've increased that rule to now you can have 3 children. So at any time, it's like legislation and governmental control, in a sense, controls also what you can do with your body, what you can, the rules essentially on you. So those are some of the things that kind of perpetuate things in society. Social issues, when we talk about poverty, women, transgender, they're often, the more marginalized as well. So poverty in itself perpetuates the cycle. And, then of course, childcare issues. Oftentimes, women are often the pillars in the community and taking care of the children. So if they're not getting adequate pay, if they don't have, the adequate resources, they don't have childcare stability, all of those things play a role. If they don't have the support at work to have mentors or someone that's going to sponsor them at work, that's, it's going to be difficult breaking through the glass ceiling. So all of those issues play into it, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree 100%. I think that accountability is very, very big because people say, what is the use of me sharing my story? What is the use of me reporting something if no one is going to be held accountable? People won't believe me, or it won't be a priority for people. So some people keep silent, but we know what happens when we are silent about our experiences, our negative experiences, or things that are perpetuating injustice, is that it keeps it going, right? So that is the fuel for injustice, is our silence, but we have to create a society and a culture where it's okay to speak out, right? Even in our workplace, it's okay to speak out. I won't be retaliated against, or I won't be, I won't lose my job. It's okay to speak out. And I know that people will be diligent in making sure that I am made whole or vindicated, or there is justice. So I definitely agree. That is a big part. And I would also say the social norms. Again, we are these things that happen in our society, they are so normal to us that we are desensitized to them. And even when it is happening to us, to a family member, or even the work that we do to our clients, we are so desensitized that we forget it is important to advocate, and that these things shouldn't be happening. And it is within our power, either as a sponsor, an advocate, a mentor, an employer, to help people overcome some of these barriers. Okay. So go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just saying definitely. But as you were speaking, I was thinking it all boils down to trust. If I don't trust my employer, if I don't trust that I can go to HR and make my complaint known, if I don't trust that I'm going to be psychologically safe, when I, talk about my work hurt, then I'm not going to speak up. And then what happens is you leave the job. And there's so many different implications with that, and so many losses when you think about losing your pension that you potentially could have had, so it just becomes complicated in that sense. But those are some other things. But trust is a big factor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100%. And a lot of times leaders and employers say, well, I can't make people talk to me, right? Which is true. You can't make people talk to you, but you can create and foster an environment where people feel comfortable and people have trust in order to share this information. So very good. So Dr. McIntosh, what would you say are some ways that we can support women that are negatively impacted by some of the things that we talked about today, which is ultimately the inequality of women, but also some of these social norms and some of these social issues that we've gotten so accustomed to?
I would say the biggest thing would start by dismantling the status quo. You talked about the social norms. Those are going to be hard, when we talk about things like racism. I mean, it's been hard to even have conversations around that, but really trying to dismantle the social norms. Women have to come together. If we want this, women have to come together as a movement, period. It doesn't, your experience should not be separated in a sense. Let's rally together. Let's address all the issues. It's not necessarily going to be kind of like a kumbaya moment, but we need to stand up for each other. We need to support legislation that talks about specific bills around issues that affect women. We need to uplift women. We need to, be supportive. We need to know what the resources are if someone comes to you and say, I'm having this issue, or I'm having this abuse, or I need support for child care. Organizations should be, really trying to retain their staff, but really providing some of those resources. How can leaders, as you mentioned, be more supportive? Talk about the EAP that's available with organizations. Some people don't even know that those benefits in their benefit package are available to them for those supports. So really being able to support them on all levels, support each other as a group, but really knowing what the resources are, educating yourself about the issue, elevating education really has seemed to be one of the biggest factors playing into this. And what we know is that, if you have young girls, they are, I believe, 2 to 3 times more likely to miss days of school if they don't have basic things like pads. And if they're missing these days from school, then they're not going to get the education that they need to be able to have that job, to be able to, to have the degree, to have that life to be sustainable. So education seems to be a very big thing. So however we can promote education from young girls on up. But like I said, just creating that safe space and that culture of support and security, and just having the resources, I would say.
Okay. All right, good. Very good. So what would you say is the role of men in helping women to overcome some of the barriers as it relates to inequality?
I would say one of the biggest things would be know your role in it. Figure out what role you're playing in it. Is there a survey that we can do for you to check your own biases when it comes to that? Yeah, check your self-awareness or your biases on that. Because it's hard for people to feel like, oh, I'm playing a role in that. But take a step back. Am I playing a role in this? If I am, how can I educate myself so I can move on and I can be a better ally? So I would say that would be the number one. Check your own biases. Educate yourself. Talk to the women that you work with, or the women just in your life on a day-to-day. Because your significant other might be like, yes, I don't notice that with me, but I notice how you behave with other women, or how you talk with other women, or there's a pattern that I see. So I would say them having those conversations would be a start, definitely. But then of course, when I talk about mentorship and sponsorship, it has been said that white men specifically have been typically the sponsors for Black women in their careers. Mm-hmm. So I would say continue to do that, more of that for more women. That would be a big role. But I would say I have heard that has been the case, but I would say definitely do more of that. Definitely educate yourself, find out what the issues are, and then educate other people. Because sometimes it's easier for men to have that conversation with men.
Yes. Yes.
So they need to speak up on our behalf to their other male colleagues, and kind of, hold them accountable. But then at an organization level, it has to be really zero tolerance, and there's not always that. They may say in the policy it is zero tolerance, but in actuality, it's not, so just across the board, holding them accountable. And we know that men are typically in a lot of those leadership roles. So you really have to try to change the organization culture. But I would say it would start with them.
Absolutely. And I think a good point that you made is that we can't have change without those that are in power, right? So we know that white men are more likely to be in leadership roles. So we need to have them, as you said, be the advocates for women, be the allies for women, speaking on their behalf, sponsoring them so that they can overcome these barriers and making the decisions to hold people accountable so that these barriers can be overcome, and people also have a sense of trust in their social areas, in their workplaces, to be able to communicate around these things. So very good. Thank you so much for that. Now we want to take some time to take a few questions for Dr. McIntosh from the audience. We have a few in chat. If you guys have any other questions, go ahead and put them in your chat and I'll in the chat box, and I'll be happy to read them. So the first question is, how does this impact those who identify as her, she? Has a study been done on the inequality for those born as male but identify as her, she within the workplace?
So I can't say that I've read any studies specifically for that, but I would say probably there may be some of the same biases in terms of they may still experience a lot of the same things that women experience. But I'm sure there's going to be an element, just based on the fact that I mean, I don't know if that individual would know. I mean, they don't have to disclose, to other individuals at the workplace. But so let me take a step back. I would say that the experiences may be the same, but there may be some other elements in there that would be different. So I can't say that I'm an expert in that. I can't say I've not really worked with anybody that has had that experience. So I don't want to steer you the wrong way, but I would say that there may be some overlap in the same biases.
Yes, yep. And I would definitely say, because that is a marginalized group, they have to have experienced some barriers, which may be similar as a woman, but may also be different because of that transition, if people are aware that you have transitioned. Okay, good, thank you. I see Nancy has her hand raised. Nancy, I don't think that we can unmute people, but it may be possible for you to just type your question in the chat, please. We also have a comment from Derek. Trust is important and is often a reflection of the culture. I am glad Dr. McIntosh made that point. Absolutely. Yep. And Latoya said, thank you. Okay, so we can wait a couple of minutes for or a couple of seconds for any other questions you guys may have.
Sorry, Dr. There is a question, an anonymous question.
Okay.
Do you mind if I read it?
Go ahead.
If you work in a male-dominated field and have been passed over 3 times for raises while your male counterparts have gotten what they asked for, what else can you do to obtain a raise?
Well, I mean, I would honestly start by, I guess, asking the question, how have you asked for the raise? Because I'm actually going through that right now, where I'm like, you have to you really have to talk about the value that you bring to the organization. I've come up with this little formula. It's called EARNI. It's kind of like, what's the expectations of the job? What has my results been? Sorry, I'm just thinking about this. Okay, expectations, what's the ask, what's the results? And basically next steps or negotiation, really outlining what value you bring to the organization. And it has to be in language where really amplifying that. So, I mean, I could and try to answer or send that formula to you. But I would just, if you want to message me, I'll put my email in the chat. But I would say, number one, I would first say, how have you asked for it? Has it been outlined, talking about the value you bring, or has it, with some examples, or has it just been you just having the conversation, without the documentation? Another point would be, if that continues to happen, then I would say the other alternative would possibly be to look for other opportunities. Is it just about the promotion in terms of the pay, or is there something promotion-wise just about a job title? I would just say needing some clarification in terms of that piece right there. But I would say definitely would start by really having a solid ask, solid, showing of the value. And if you feel like you're just getting nowhere, then I would say maybe looking for other opportunities. And if it's not singly about the pay, then being creative in terms of an ask of, what other things that are available. So I'm hoping that's helping, but I can, like I said, send you my little formula. I'll just put my information here and you can email me and I'll send it to you, because this is something that I've been actively working on.
Thank you. And I would also say be bold about what you've done and keep track of it, because a lot of times people don't keep track of it. A lot of times women won't speak to their accomplishments. So I think it is be bold, do an assessment of everything like Dr. McIntosh said, you've done and brought to that organization and can continue to bring to that organization, but also making sure that you have that confidence, right? And you have that presence that this is something that you earn and deserve. So when women are applying for jobs, they are less likely to apply for the job if they don't have all of the qualifications. Men, they will apply for the job if they only have 20% of the qualifications. So it is important that, you know, you have that confidence that this is what you want and this is what you deserve. And then you also have the substance to back that up and get comfortable speaking on your accomplishments and what you've done and what you deserve.
And just one more point. And then from those 3 times, have you asked for any feedback? You know, so just finding out, you know, if this has been turned down for any specific reason, they should be able to tell you the reason. So you can be able to alter that the next time. So I would say, and then, you know, is it because if the reason is, okay, they think that you need some additional leadership training or education training, there's certificate programs. Then the next thing you could probably try to say is leverage them, you know, sending you to a class or a course or something that will elevate you to that point of getting that promotion. So I would say seek some feedback to see if there's something that you can change on your end, and maybe they can also support you by, you know, offering to pay for that course or training that may be helpful for you to get to that next position.
Absolutely. We have another question. Is human trafficking a major problem locally?
I would say it is. The issue with, I would preface that by saying that New York State has the 4th highest call volume to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Okay. So I would preface it by saying that, yes, it's very common here. There's been many traffickers, I think at least 13 since probably 2013 that have been convicted. And the one human trafficker, he was actually targeting girls from East High School. So, and he would take their money, he would take them to Albany, Buffalo, Rochester, and have them in hotels. And, you know, like I said, basically sell them and take all their money. So I would say it is a problem. The biggest issue with human trafficking, though, it's a hidden crime. So oftentimes, I mean, you barely have someone that has been a victim of domestic violence coming to you saying, hey, I'm a victim. You know, so you can imagine with someone that's being trafficked, they're not going to come to you and say, hey, I'm a victim of, you know, trafficking. Oftentimes they don't know they're a victim. So they're not going to come to you and say that. So that may delay you even knowing that they're a victim. So I would say it is an issue. The prevalence of it is very kind of unknown, but it is a $150 billion industry. And that's said to be more than Starbucks, Nike, and Google combined. So I would say, yes, it is a problem.
Wow. Okay, we have another question. How do we value the diversity of women who are Latina and the women of color in the workplace? How do we encourage development of these women within the system?
Well, I mean, I would say that, you know, I would definitely speak up. I would speak up. I would bring attention to this as an issue. I honestly, like, even for me, like, I'm the only one in my department. I'm the only person that looks like me in my department. I've only been that with the one person in that department for 9 years. Oftentimes, many areas that I work in, I'm the only one. So what I would say is I've often been the only one to speak up on those issues related to Black and Brown communities. So I would say, you know, for me to even, I had to be the voice to try to get other people or other, you know, basically Black and Brown communities to the table to be considered, for, you know, even providers to think differently about our patients, about staff. So I would say, you know, you're probably going to have to, you know, speak about it. Maybe now, like I said, I don't necessarily think the department in itself works, but I would say have a conversation with maybe your leader If it's a problem of, you're not getting a position, maybe you have to be the champion for the diversity initiative. Maybe you have to start educating about it. Unfortunately, oftentimes, we have to be the champion for those issues if those issues are going to be seen or addressed. So I would say amplify your voice, definitely. Because the reality of it is sometimes we have these false expectations of people, like they're supposed to know this. And the reality of it is, people, not that I'm making excuses for people, but people have, any one of us have a million things going on in our lives at one time. So, like I said, oftentimes you have to bring that up. You have to amplify your voice. You have to let people know that this is an issue. We feel like Latino women are being passed over here. So we need to amplify your voice. So that's another thing that would be like allyship. So, your allies, who can also amplify your voice? Who can you, your work wife or work husband or your work person, basically, how can you have them also amplify your voice, bring light to some of these issues? So I'm hoping some of that's saying, helping you, but definitely, like I said, you have to speak up. And I know the fear of, if I speak up, they're going to retaliate. I'm going to seem like the problem person. But if you truly want the issue addressed or to bring some visibility, you have to speak up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, as we are developing and growing DE&I, it is our goal to bring awareness to these things and ensure people are having these conversations, but we are also creating pathways for people from diverse backgrounds to grow and develop and have more opportunity within the organization. And it is definitely a journey, folks. It is a journey, and it's going to take us a while. It took us hundreds of years to get here, and it'll take us a while to start to change some of these norms, some of these policies and these structures, but we are definitely diligent in that. Okay, Dr. Celia, thank you so much for being with us today. You really, really had some great insight, and I really, really appreciate all your expertise, all your transparency around these topics. And I'm hoping that we stay connected. You have left your email address in the chat, so those who have additional questions, please feel free to follow up. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate all the questions and for having the space and the time for being here. So thank you very much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. It is truly our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. And feel free to stay. Feel free to stay for the rest of the meeting if you like. All right, guys. So there's a few terms that you've heard Dr. Celia talk about today. One is equality, and you've also heard equity. So what is the difference between the two? So equality is really meaning that we are treating people the same, and then the equity piece is making sure that people get what they need in order to succeed. So when we think about the differences that exist naturally and biologically between men and women, sometimes in order for us to be treated the same, we may need a little bit of equity. So we may need something that will provide us the same opportunities. It may be something different, but in order for us to be treated the same and get the same opportunities, there's some equity that may need to happen given the differences that naturally exist within who we are. A big focus today has also been allyship. And what does it mean to be an ally? And really it means being someone that is advocating for, speaking up for those that are different, or they can be the same, but they are being marginalized, they are being oppressed. It is really through our communication and having the courage to be that ally and really help pull somebody up or get our networks, our groups, the groups that we are in, our in groups, to see the different things that we have done to oppress or the biases that we have against a particular group. Okay, and mentorship is also so important as to what Dr. Celia talked about as well. So mentorship is the influence, guidance, and direction given by a mentor. So I think especially in the workplace, it is very, very, and even in your life outside of work, it is very important to have a mentor. So someone that is giving you information, giving you guidance, and being that person. Even in school, I found it important to have that person, especially in college when I was away from home and I didn't know anybody and I really didn't know how the norms of things, but being able to connect with a person or with a group of people to go through that experience or that have gone through that experience to get that advice as well as the information to grow and be successful. Okay, so those are some terms. I want to dig a little bit deeper into how to be an effective ally. So a lot of times people, they believe in a cause, they believe in a person, but they are limited by their ability to speak up on it. So for example, in a meeting, and I think we kind of touched on this, in a meeting where you see somebody as being oppressed or they are being marginalized, they are being ignored, overlooked, it is very important in the moment to have the courage to speak out and bring people in. So what does that mean to speak out? And just the example that Dr. Cecilia gave us is being able to say, hey, you're mansplaining, right? So that's a clear example of calling people out, but in the moment. So that puts them on notice in the moment, but also everyone around can kind of see what the impact is and what the effect is and what it kind of means. And that can be very, very uncomfortable. And so it will take a particular level of courage, but that is how you use your voice, amplify your voice, like Dr. Celia said, being able to amplify your voice in order to reduce the harm that is happening to others. But when calling people out, you also want to have the ability and the opportunity to call people in. And what that really means is to understand where that came from, that communication, that treatment of someone else. Where did that come from? How did you come up with that decision, or what made you make that statement, or, you know, those different things that kind of tell us why someone is doing. So again, we do things that are so automatic in our communication and our behavior, we don't understand the why we are doing it. So understanding the why is really that call in process, calling people in, understanding the why, but also getting them to understand the impact that they are having on others. So for example, like we just talked about, understanding that trauma or, you know, that the diminishing that you can put in someone and you not even realize it. So it is so important that we create a culture where we are able to call out the things that are happening on our teams and our everyday interactions, but also be able to call in and have those moments of education in the moment. Okay, thank you. So what I want to do now is kind of turn things over to Matt Burrell on my team. He is our MWBE specialist, but he has also served several years in the U.S. military. And as many of us know, the U.S. military can be very, very discriminative against women. And he's had some experiences where he had to be an ally for women to support, empower, and grow women on different teams that he's had. So I want to turn things over to Matt to share his insights and his stories.
Thank you, Dr. Kimbrel. Well, as Dr. Kimbrel mentioned, I did spend some time in the military. I was a member of the Air Force for 24 years and had an opportunity to do not only just the work, but to go through the supervision ranks, you know, all the way up through senior enlisted advisement. One story that when I was thinking about this, that really hit with me, I was a young supervisor. I had 8 directs working for me in an office setting. My office was away from them. And Monday mornings, they would have coffee and they would talk. And I really didn't think much of it. I thought actually it was a good thing that they were getting together, bonding as a team, sharing their experiences. But then I would pop in and start hearing some of these stories from the weekend. And one of their team members was a female. And for a while, she wouldn't tell me, hey, this is bothering her. Where they would talk about what they did the weekend before, maybe not use the best language, maybe just in their stories that they didn't think anything of it because they were males. She started becoming very, very offended. Her work started slipping. She was not performing well. So through counseling and direct counseling with her, we found out that it wasn't necessarily that she couldn't do the work. It was kind of the way she was left to be felt. Even though there was nothing directly directed at her, that environment, that culture that was being created was the reason why she was having these problems at work. So we were able to counsel these 7 young men as far as what's appropriate. It was eye-opening to me because I'm sure for my part of my career, I've been part of those conversations in mixed company. And I believe we thought if it wasn't being directed at that person, that it probably wouldn't be offensive. But that was really an eye-opening experience for me. And the rest of my career, I was able to impart that in every work setting I was at, whether we had women working with us or not, because you have to realize that if you can stem it in that work culture, so we don't have those types of things happening, whether that person stays with you or goes on, they can take that and perpetuate that. So again, that's just one of the stories. And I want people to think about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about, workplace things today, and think about what you see in your workplace, what's appropriate, what's not, what may have bothered you, but maybe didn't bother the group as a whole. And I want you to realize that it's okay to say something, whether it be to your supervisor, to an advocate, to an ally. You want to make sure that if it's something that you feel is inappropriate, that's making you uncomfortable, that you feel empowered to say something. For my men out there, how can we support women in the workplace? I would really say the first thing is we need to be an advocate for women, and not just simply because they're a woman, but advocates in things like for promotion, special assignments, recognition. If we are in a position to do that, to make sure that they're being recognized for what they do. There's a bullet at the bottom that says give credit. I've seen many cases where a woman or minority has done some great work on a project or in a system, but yet they're not giving their proper credit. And now it just doesn't affect that incident. We know how things work in the world of business and jobs. If you want to be promoted, you have to get recognized by your supervisors, by your boss. You want to bring in good products to your company or to your workplace. If you're not given the proper credit, people are getting promoted that didn't necessarily do the work, but are taking the credit. So we need to make sure that we don't do that. One thing that I've seen in nearly every workplace I've worked in, and it's a second bullet here, it's called share the office housework. Many times I've seen where men and women get into almost quote unquote traditional roles in a workplace. I've seen where maybe women make the coffee, men take out the trash. Remember, those are all shared duties, and no one has to be, in a pigeon into a role like that. So don't feel that you have to be. For men, when you're dealing with women, respect their space. There's an article I linked below, and they mentioned Keanu Reeves. And if you realize when he takes a picture with female fans, if you look at a shot from behind, he doesn't actually put his arm around them where it's touching them. And I think that's done out of respect, so there's no misconception of what things mean. And this can be as simple as if you're working with a coworker, a female coworker in a workspace, not getting right on top or looking over a computer screen. We've seen those pictures and we may have had that happen. Even if the intention is not sexual or any kind of advance, I would say that you want to watch what you do and not do that. Calling out inequities, we see them all the time. And as we've heard Dr. Celia and Dr. Kimbrel talk about, to say something in the moment, to say something when it matters is probably the most important thing. If you don't feel you can go to your direct supervisor, there are other avenues you can take. There are other supervisors, there's other people you can reach out to. You can reach out to DEI. If you see these inequities, and you're worried about reprisals, make sure they get reported. Make sure that you're bringing someone's attention. Because the last thing you want to do is have something happen when you could have actually either said something or stood up, but by your inaction and many others' inaction, something negative was allowed to happen. One thing I found really important when dealing with, especially from a supervisor standpoint, when dealing with women, is to really listen to them. Listen to their stories and realize there are going to be differences. They are not necessarily because of their gender, but because of their experiences, they're going to interpret things and perceive things in a different way. And if nothing more than just to increase your awareness, like I said, my story in the beginning, I hadn't thought in terms of men and women in the workplace and stories out of school and off-color things, because we were all serving in the same function. We were kind of taught they were all one team. But when you start realizing that not everyone feels the same way about, a lot of topics, then you see that, hey, this is where you can start setting those boundaries and guidelines as far as what's appropriate, what's not. One thing I see a lot It's funny, we talked about how it works differently from both sides of the gender spectrum. Using terms like dear, love, honey, that kind of thing in the workplace. If you're a male, I would recommend highly against it. It does cause a misconception. You know, it could be taken differently. And I would also say, if you're a female, please don't use those terms. Even though it may be more accepted from someone that's a female to a male, again, it can cause those misconceptions and people will get some different ideas. You know, if I'm going to highlight this again, my big thing is I'm a firm believer of, if you do the work, if you're the one that brought an idea to the table, if you're the one that's, you know, bringing the ideas, you need to give that credit. Us as men in the workplace, if we see that, we need to make sure that that happens. Because if we don't, we could be holding that person back from really good, positive things, from great things, because they're not being recognized as they should. And as we know in the workplace, that's extremely important and can be in promotions. And with women, especially Black women and other minority women in the first place, they're already behind as far as a lot of people's perceptions. They're already struggling, you know, to get recognized, get promoted. And for us not to give them that proper credit is, again, just a detriment to what they're trying to do and a detriment to equality and equitable chances. Okay. One last thing that I have to talk about is, and we spoke about this before, the celebration coming up, I believe this is tomorrow, Wednesday, October 20th, or the October 26th, is Women's Equity Day. And what is that about? Really, it's the passing of suffrage. If you think about our history and how long we've been as a country, women have only been able to vote for less than half of that. You know, as we know, the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, giving women the right to vote. For people in the local area, there was a lot of history in this local area about the war and the battle for suffrage. And think about, it took that long. And if that were the only thing that were an issue, we'd have been good starting back in 1920. But I want you to think about, even though women have the right to vote and there seems to be equality, think about where there are those inequities in the workplace, in our lives, and how we can help mitigate those and really lift them up and get closer and closer to where there actually is true equity, even though we feel there should be. It's not always the case. All right, now I will turn it over to my partner, Jesus Posh. He is our language access coordinator, and he's going to run you through some other observations and some other events coming up. Posh?
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. So a couple of things I would like to go over is what we're looking into for August. And as we talk about the Equal Pay Day, throughout the year, there are different dates to highlight the inequality in terms of pay for for women. So we look at the Asian American, we look at in March, we also look at the women's Equal Pay Day in general. So for August 3rd, we look into the Black woman's equal pay day, where it takes about 19 months for a woman to earn as much as a white male will earn. And this is something that it's important to highlight, and this can bring mental health concerns to a female, especially because her sacrifice for her education is not highlighted when it comes to equal pay day and all the efforts and sacrifices that a person puts into reaching where she is. So this is something that is important to highlight, and it's important to advocate for our females. So this is something that we celebrate or we highlight on August 3rd. And on August 9th is the International Day of the World Indigenous People. The International Day of the World's Indigenous People is observed on this day and is to highlight the inequality that's also in terms of indigenous people, and to highlight the sacrifices that they made as well, and to celebrate as well their culture. In many cultures, you see that they celebrate with parades. They come out with the instruments that they build, and this is something that's very important for them, and it's important to highlight it as well, because they take pride for their culture, and they stand for their beliefs. So this is something that each celebrate on August 9th. On August 17, we look at Marcus Garvey Day, who was a Jamaican, and he was born a political activities, and he had worked in Central America, also in the United States and in Europe. So he was a person that had a strong voice for people that had African descent, and he was able to create opportunities for them through different projects that he had to create work or employment for them. So he's a big person, or was a big person in Jamaica, and they celebrate this day on his behalf. So on August 19, we look at the World Humanitarian Day. This is the day to dedicate and recognize humanitarian personnel. If you're a person that has been involved in helping others that have been in a vulnerable situation, this day we recognize you, and we also thank you for the support and things that you have been doing. So these are the things that we're looking into August for DE&I. So right now I'm gonna pass it on to my colleague, Amber Medley.
Hello, everyone. This was such a good webinar today. I really enjoyed it, learning about the inequalities between men and women, and we know that we still have so much farther to go, but we have come a long way. With that being said, we did have one question come in that I will read the question and direct to Dr. Kimbrel. Does the county offer professional development for women of color, mentorship opportunities to advance college advancement, and how can the county level up women of color employees?
Thanks, Amber. That's a great question. And the answer is yes. We are creating those structures, those pathway programs, so that we can advance and uplift women of color, people of diverse backgrounds, people with disabilities, and, and all people of differences that may be overlooked. So yes, we are in the process of developing those, and we will keep everybody updated once those things have been implemented and are available for people to start being involved in.
Thank you, Dr. Kimbrel. And in the essence of maintaining our time, we have gone over a little bit. So any questions or comments that you may have further, please direct them to mcdei@monroecounty.gov. Again, that's mcdei@monroecounty.gov.
Okay. Yep, and we can just go to the last slide. Next time, we'll talk more about the department liaisons. So again, everyone, thank you for your time. Thank you for the great questions. We really appreciate you meeting us here every month at the same time. So remember, if there are any questions, if you have any ideas for topics, you have any feedback, you want to share a story, please feel free to email us or give us a call, and we'll look forward to talking to you again next month. Thank you.